At 55, I had millions. Then my son and daughter-in-law plotted against me and took everything. Cars, mansion, money, all gone. I fled to another state and became a courtroom janitor. Nobody believed I was a lawyer. One day, an old man stood defenseless against the state's top lawyer. I dropped my mop. "Your Honor, I represent him." They laughed. But in 20 minutes, I cleared his name, and the judge went pale when I discovered he was a media tycoon. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Alma, and at 55 years old, I thought I had everything figured out. I owned a mansion on Oak Ridge Drive worth $3 million, drove a Mercedes that cost more than most people make in a year, and had built a law practice that generated over $2 million annually. More importantly, I believed I had raised a son who loved me. I was wrong about everything. The morning it all fell apart started like any other Tuesday. I was reviewing contracts in my home office when Jasper walked in, his designer suit immaculate as always. At 32, he had inherited my sharp features, but none of my work ethic. Still, he was my only child, and I had spent years convincing myself that his entitled attitude was just a phase. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, settling into the leather chair across from my mahogany desk. Something in his tone made me look up from my papers. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" He placed a thick manila folder on my desk, his expression unreadable. "I've been managing your accounts for 5 years now, and there are some issues we need to address." My stomach tightened. I had given him power of attorney over my finances when he graduated law school, thinking it would teach him responsibility while lightening my workload. What kind of issues? Jasper opened the folder, revealing bank statements, investment reports, and legal documents I didn't recognize. "Your spending has been out of control. The mansion mortgage is $12,000 a month, your credit cards are maxed out, and the business account is overdrawn." I stared at the papers, confusion clouding my thoughts. "That's impossible. The practice generates over $2 million yearly. My personal accounts should have at least $4 million. Had," Jasper corrected, his voice gaining a cold edge I'd never heard before. "You've been living beyond your means for years. I've been trying to manage the damage, but it's too late." My hands trembled as I reached for the bank statements. The numbers swimming before my eyes told a story I couldn't comprehend. Withdrawals of $50,000, $75,000, $100,000, amounts I had never authorized, dated over the past 2 years. "Jasper, I never made these withdrawals. I would remember—" "Mom," he interrupted, his tone now openly patronizing. "You've been forgetful lately. Sometimes you don't remember conversations we've had, decisions you've made. I've been covering for you, but I can't anymore." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Forgetful? I ran a successful law practice, managed complex cases, remembered every detail of my clients' lives. I am not forgetful. These transactions, I never authorized them. Jasper sighed, a sound that conveyed both pity and frustration. "Lenny and I have been discussing this for months. We think you need help." At the mention of his wife, my blood chilled. Lenny had married Jasper 8 years ago, drawn to his trust fund like a moth to flame. 29 years old with no career, no ambition beyond spending money she hadn't earned. I had tolerated her for my son's sake, but I'd never trusted her calculating smile or the way she inventoried my possessions with her eyes. "What does Lenny have to do with my finances?" "She's been helping me organize everything. Mom, the truth is, you're broke, worse than broke. The IRS has placed liens on the practice. The house is 3 months behind on mortgage payments, and your credit cards are at their limits." I felt the room spinning around me. This couldn't be happening. I had worked 30 years to build my wealth, sacrificing relationships, social life, everything to ensure financial security. "Show me the actual account balances." Jasper pulled out his phone, navigating to a banking app, The screen showed my primary checking account with a balance of $347, my savings account, 0, my investment portfolio, liquidated. Where did it all go? I whispered. Your lifestyle, Mom. The shopping trips you don't remember. The investments in companies that don't exist. The loans you co-signed for people who defaulted. I have documentation for everything. He produced more papers. Credit card statements showing purchases at luxury stores I'd never visited. Investment contracts bearing what looked like my signature, but felt foreign under my fingertips. Loan agreements for amounts that staggered me. I didn't sign these, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. The signatures looked like mine. The dates spanned recent months, and Jasper's confident presentation made me question my own memory. The doctor said this might happen, Jasper continued, his voice taking on a rehearsed quality. Early onset dementia can cause financial confusion, poor decision-making. That's why you gave me power of attorney, to protect you from yourself. Dementia. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. I had never been diagnosed with any cognitive issues, never experienced memory problems beyond normal middle-age moments. But as I stared at the evidence spread across my desk, doubt crept into my mind like poison. What are you saying, Jasper? I'm saying you need care, professional care. Lenny and I have found a nice facility upstate where you'll be safe and comfortable. The sale of the house and remaining assets will cover the costs for several years. My world tilted on its axis. You want to put me in a home? It's for your own good. You can't live alone anymore, and we can't constantly monitor your spending. This way, you'll have round-the-clock supervision and medical care. I looked at my son, this man I had raised, educated, supported for 3 decades, and realized I was staring at a stranger. The love in his eyes had been replaced by something calculating and cold. And what about you and Lenny? Where will you live? We'll move into the penthouse downtown. The rent is only $8,000 monthly, and it's closer to my new consulting business. New consulting business. Penthouse rent. The pieces clicked together in my mind like a puzzle solving itself. $8,000 monthly for a penthouse meant luxury beyond anything Jasper had ever earned through his own efforts. His consulting business was apparently funded by my liquidated assets. You're stealing from me, I said, the words barely above a whisper. Jasper's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. I'm protecting what's left of your estate. If you keep making these financial mistakes, you'll lose everything anyway. This way, at least there's something to preserve. For whom? For your care, Mom, and eventually, for your legacy. Legacy. He meant inheritance. My son was gutting my life's work to fund his lavish lifestyle while convincing me I was mentally incapacitated. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. I want to see my primary attorney. Robert Chen has handled my affairs for 15 years. He'll sort this out. Mom, Jasper's voice carried a note of genuine sadness that almost fooled me. Robert retired 6 months ago. Don't you remember? You were at his farewell party. I searched my memory, but found no trace of such an event. Either I was truly losing my mind, or Jasper was an accomplished liar. Then I'll find another attorney. With what money? And Mom, who do you think will believe you? I have 5 years of documentation showing your deteriorating judgment, medical records suggesting cognitive decline, a pattern of increasingly erratic behavior that multiple witnesses can confirm. The trap closed around me like a vice. I realized that this conversation wasn't Jasper breaking bad news to me. It was him revealing a plan that had been in motion for years. The power of attorney, the gradual isolation from my professional contacts, the subtle suggestions that I was becoming forgetful. It had all been orchestrated. Why? I asked, the word barely audible. Because I deserve better than waiting for you to die, he replied with stunning honesty. Lenny and I have dreams, plans. We shouldn't have to live like paupers while you hoard millions. The cruelty of his words stole my breath. This was my child. The baby I had nursed through fevers. The toddler I had read bedtime stories to. The young man I had put through law school at a cost of $200,000. You have 48 hours to pack your personal belongings, Jasper continued, his tone now purely business. The house goes on the market Friday, and you'll be transferred to the facility this weekend. I stared at him, searching for any trace of the boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, who had once made me a Mother's Day card with crayons and construction paper. That child was gone, replaced by this cold stranger who spoke of my life like a business transaction. What if I refuse? Then I'll have you declared incompetent and committed involuntarily. The medical evidence is already in place, Mom. This way is kinder for everyone. The medical evidence. I wondered how long he had been building his case, what doctors he had bribed or misled, what lies he had told to create a paper trail of my supposed decline. I walked to the window, looking out at the garden I had planted 15 years ago. The roses were blooming, their red petals bright against the morning sun. In 48 hours, this would all belong to someone else. Does Lenny know? I asked without turning around. It was her idea, Jasper said, and I heard the scrape of his chair as he stood. She has a gift for financial planning. Of course it was. I should have seen it coming. The way Lenny had slowly inserted herself into family discussions about money, the subtle questions about my will and estate plans, the times I had caught her photographing my jewelry and artwork. I'll need time to process this, I said. Don't take too long. The papers are already filed, and the facility is expecting you Saturday morning. I heard him gathering his documents, the soft thud of the folder closing, the whisper of his expensive shoes across my Persian rug. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, Mom, I am sorry it came to this. But he wasn't. I could hear the relief in his voice, the satisfaction of a plan finally coming to fruition. After he left, I remained at the window for a long time, watching the roses sway in the breeze. By evening, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to any facility. I packed a single suitcase with essentials, withdrew the remaining $347 from my checking account, and wrote a letter to Jasper that I left on his childhood pillow. You win, it said, but you'll never see me again. At 55 years old, I walked away from everything I had ever known, carrying nothing but the clothes on my back and the devastating knowledge that my own son had destroyed me. As I drove into the night, one thought echoed in my mind. I had raised a monster, and now I had to figure out how to survive him. 6 months after fleeing my old life, I stood in the supply closet of the Riverside County Courthouse, staring at my reflection in a cracked mirror someone had taped to the inside of the door. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. Graying hair pulled into a practical ponytail, hands roughened from industrial cleaning chemicals, wearing a faded blue uniform with Alma embroidered on the chest pocket. I had driven 800 miles that first night, stopping only when my car ran out of gas in a town called Millbrook. Population 15,000, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, except nobody cared about mine. Perfect for disappearing. The courthouse job had been my salvation and my daily humiliation. $11 an hour to mop the floors where I had once commanded respect as an attorney. The irony wasn't lost on me as I wheeled my yellow cleaning cart through corridors lined with law books, past courtrooms where justice was supposedly served. Alma, you missed a spot in courtroom 3, called out Marco, my supervisor, as I emerged from the supply closet. At 45, he was a decent man who worked 2 jobs to support his family. He had no idea that the woman mopping floors had once billed clients $500 an hour. I'll take care of it, I replied, grateful that my voice no longer caught when I spoke about courthouse business. The first month had been torture, listening to legal proceedings I could have handled better than the attorneys arguing them, watching defendants receive inadequate representation while I pushed a mop. I made my way back to courtroom 3, the wheels of my cart squeaking with each rotation. The judge had left for lunch, but a few attorneys remained, huddled around the defense table reviewing files for their afternoon session. I recognized the type. Young public defenders, overwhelmed and underpaid, doing their best with impossible caseloads. The prosecution has 12 witnesses, one was saying, her voice tight with stress. We've had 3 days to prepare a defense for a capital case. It's insane. Welcome to public defense, her colleague replied wearily. At least Thompson isn't prosecuting. That guy would convict his own mother if it boosted his conviction rate. Thompson. District Attorney Marcus Thompson, the most ruthless prosecutor in the county, known for his perfect conviction record and political ambitions. I had read about him in the local newspaper, a man who saw defendants as stepping stones to the governor's mansion. I started mopping around the attorney's table, making myself invisible the way I had learned to do. People talked freely around cleaning staff, as if we were furniture with ears. In 6 months, I had heard confessions, witnessed plea bargains, and observed enough judicial misconduct to fill a law journal. Did you see the news about that Westfield Heights case? One attorney asked, scrolling through her phone. Some hotshot lawyer's son inherited $8 million after his mother was declared incompetent. Lucky bastard. My mop froze mid-swipe. Westfield Heights was my old neighborhood, and $8 million was roughly what my estate had been worth. Jasper Hernandez, she continued reading, says here his mother suffered from early-onset dementia and had been making erratic financial decisions. He's using the inheritance to expand his consulting business. Hernandez. Jasper had taken Lenny's maiden name, probably to distance himself from any connection to me. Smart move. It would make it harder for anyone to trace the money back to its real source. Nice work if you can get it, the other attorney commented. My mother can barely remember where she put her keys, but she's sharp as a tack when it comes to money. They laughed, and I forced myself to continue mopping while my heart hammered against my ribs. Jasper wasn't just living off my stolen wealth. He was publicly celebrating it. The newspaper article probably painted him as a devoted son who had saved his poor, demented mother from financial ruin. Alma, you okay? Marco appeared beside me, concern creasing his weathered face. You look like you've seen a ghost. Just tired, I managed, realizing I had been gripping the mop handle so tightly my knuckles had gone white. Why don't you take your lunch break? That corner can wait until later. I nodded gratefully and retreated to the employee break room, a windowless space with flickering fluorescent lights and a coffee maker that had seen better decades. I sat at the scratched Formica table where the cleaning crew ate their sandwiches and tried to process what I had just learned. Jasper had not only stolen my money, he had rewritten history to make himself the hero. According to his version, I was a sick old woman who needed to be saved from her own poor judgment. He was the caring son who had stepped in to prevent disaster. The worst part was that I couldn't prove otherwise. I had fled rather than fighting, leaving behind any evidence that might have supported my case. The medical records Jasper claimed to have could have been fabricated, but challenging them would require resources I didn't possess, and credibility I had lost the moment I disappeared. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but the area code was from Westfield Heights. My hands shook as I answered. Hello? Mom? Jasper's voice was carefully modulated, conveying just the right amount of concern. Mom, where are you? We've been so worried. We. As if Lenny had spent sleepless nights fretting over my whereabouts instead of enjoying my money. I'm fine, Jasper. Please come home. The facility has excellent doctors and you'll be so much more comfortable there. This running away isn't helping anyone. I'm not coming back. Mom, you're sick. You need help. I know you're scared and confused, but we can work through this together. The patience in his voice was perfectly calibrated, the tone of someone dealing with a difficult but beloved relative. If anyone overheard this conversation, they would hear a devoted son pleading with his mentally ill mother to accept necessary care. I'm not sick and I'm not confused. I know exactly what you did. What I did was protect you from yourself. The doctor said this kind of paranoia is common with your condition. You're creating conspiracy theories because accepting the truth is too painful. The sophistication of his manipulation was breathtaking. Every accusation I made would be dismissed as a symptom of my supposed illness. Every protest would be evidence of my declining mental state. "Where are you staying?" he asked when I didn't respond. "Are you eating properly? Do you have your medications?" Medications, another fabrication to support his narrative. I wondered what prescription bottles he had planted in my medicine cabinet, what pharmacy records he had created to document my treatment for dementia. "I have to go," I said. "Mom, please." I hung up and immediately turned off the phone. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely manage the simple task. Jasper had found my number somehow, which meant he was looking for me. The thought of him and Lenny showing up in Millbrook, armed with commitment papers and a fictional medical history, made my stomach churn. I returned to work early, needing the distraction of physical labor. The courthouse afternoon session was beginning, and I positioned myself in the hallway outside courtroom 3, organizing my cleaning supplies while keeping one ear on the proceedings inside. "Your Honor, the state calls its first witness in the matter of People versus Rodriguez." I knew this case, had been following it through courthouse gossip for 2 weeks. Miguel Rodriguez, 68 years old, accused of embezzling pension funds from the construction company where he had worked for 30 years. The evidence was circumstantial, but District Attorney Thompson had a talent for turning weak cases into slam dunks. The defendant had sole access to the pension fund accounts, Thompson was arguing. Financial records show systematic withdrawals totaling $400,000 over 18 months, coinciding exactly with his gambling debts. Through the courtroom's open door, I could see Rodriguez at the defense table. He was a small man with calloused hands and tired eyes, represented by a court-appointed attorney who looked like she had just graduated law school. "Mr. Rodriguez," Thompson continued during cross-examination, "you expect this jury to believe that someone else accessed your secured computer, used your personal passwords, and stole money from accounts only you controlled." "I don't know how it happened," Rodriguez replied, his voice barely audible. "I never took that money. I worked 40 years to earn my pension. Yet you were $40,000 in debt to illegal bookmakers. Quite a coincidence." The defense attorney objected weakly, but the damage was done. I could see it in the jury's faces. They had already decided Rodriguez was guilty. The evidence was circumstantial, but the story Thompson had constructed was compelling and easy to understand. As I listened to the proceedings, a familiar rage built in my chest. This was exactly what had happened to me, except instead of embezzlement, the crime was financial exploitation by family members. Instead of gambling debts, the motive was greed and entitlement. Rodriguez was being railroaded by a prosecutor who cared more about his conviction rate than the truth. I was being systematically erased by a son who had spent years planning my destruction. The difference was that Rodriguez had representation, however inadequate. I had nothing but a mop and a grudge. That evening, I sat in my studio apartment, $400 monthly rent for 2 rooms and a kitchenette that smelled permanently of the Chinese restaurant downstairs, and stared at the framed photograph I had rescued from my old life. It showed 5-year-old Jasper on Christmas morning, his face bright with joy as he hugged a stuffed dinosaur I had given him. Where had that joyful child gone? When had love been replaced by calculation? I searched my memories for warning signs, moments when I might have seen this betrayal coming, but found only the normal frustrations of raising a privileged child. Maybe that was the problem. I had given Jasper everything. The best schools, expensive clothes, a car on his 16th birthday, college tuition, graduate school, a generous allowance that continued well into his 20s. I had wanted him to have the advantages I'd never had. But instead I had created a monster who saw my success as something he was entitled to inherit. The irony was crushing. I had worked 70-hour weeks for 30 years, sacrificing relationships and personal happiness to build wealth that would secure my son's future. Instead, I had financed my own destruction. My phone buzzed with a text from the same Westfield Heights number. "Mom, I hired a private investigator. Please call me before this gets more complicated. The threat was clear. Jasper wasn't going to let me disappear quietly. He needed me committed to that facility to complete his story of the devoted son caring for his sick mother. As long as I was free, I was a loose end that could unravel his carefully constructed narrative. I deleted the message and walked to my bathroom mirror, studying my reflection once again. The woman looking back at me was harder now, leaner from the physical labor and stress, but her eyes were clearer than they had been in months. For 6 months, I had hidden in this courthouse, mopping floors and listening to other people's legal troubles. I had told myself I was just surviving, just getting by until I figured out my next move. But as I stood there thinking about Miguel Rodriguez and his rigged trial, about Jasper's stolen millions and fabricated medical records, about all the injustice I witnessed daily in these hallways, I realized something important. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was learning. And tomorrow, I would discover exactly what I had learned when an old man in an expensive suit would walk into courtroom 3, facing the legal system's most ruthless prosecutor, with no one to defend him except an underpaid public defender. That's when everything would change. That's when Alma the janitor would die, and something much more dangerous would be born. They had no idea who was cleaning their floors. The old man walked into courtroom 3 at exactly 2 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon, and I knew immediately that he didn't belong there. Not in the defendant's chair, anyway. He was tall and distinguished, probably in his late 70s, with silver hair that looked professionally styled and a charcoal gray suit that cost more than I made in 6 months. His leather briefcase was worn but expensive, the kind that improves with age rather than deteriorating. Everything about him suggested wealth, power, influence, except for the fact that he was sitting alone at the defense table while District Attorney Marcus Thompson sharpened his knives for another easy conviction. I positioned my cleaning cart near the back of the courtroom, pretending to organize supplies while watching the proceedings. The bailiff had announced the case, People versus Henry Blackwood, charged with financial fraud and elder abuse. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were charging a 78-year-old man with elder abuse. "Where is your attorney, Mr. Blackwood?" Judge Patricia Wells asked, her voice carrying the impatience of someone who had been on the bench for 20 years and seen every possible courtroom drama. "I dismissed him yesterday, Your Honor," Blackwood replied, his voice steady and cultured. "I chose to represent myself." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Pro se defendants in felony cases were rare enough, but a man facing 20 years in prison who voluntarily gave up legal representation was almost unheard of. Thompson practically licked his lips. His perfect conviction record was about to get another notch, and this one wouldn't even require effort. "Your Honor, the state is ready to proceed." "Mr. Blackwood, I strongly advise you to reconsider representing yourself. These are serious charges that could result in significant prison time." "I understand, Your Honor. I'm prepared to proceed." Judge Wells sighed and called for the prosecution's opening statement. I had seen Thompson in action before. He was theatrical, persuasive, and completely ruthless. Watching him destroy an unrepresented elderly defendant felt like watching a professional boxer beat up a child. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Thompson began, his voice resonating through the courtroom, "the defendant sits before you today because greed has no age limit. Henry Blackwood systematically defrauded investors out of $2.7 million, targeting senior citizens who trusted him with their retirement savings." I listened as Thompson painted Blackwood as a predator who had used his reputation and charm to convince elderly investors to put their life savings into fraudulent investment schemes. According to the prosecution, Blackwood had created fake companies, forged documents, and disappeared millions of dollars into offshore accounts. The evidence will show that Mr. Blackwood lived a lavish lifestyle, funded by stolen money, while his victims struggled to pay for basic necessities. He bought expensive cars, traveled the world, and purchased luxury real estate, all while knowing that the people who trusted him were losing everything. It was a compelling narrative, and I could see the jury buying every word. Thompson had a gift for making complex financial crimes seem simple and personal. He wasn't just prosecuting fraud. He was avenging grandparents who had been robbed of their dignity. When Thompson finished his opening, Judge Wells turned to Blackwood. "Mr. Blackwood, would you like to make an opening statement?" The old man stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to public speaking. When he began to talk, his voice filled the courtroom without strain. "Ladies and gentlemen, District Attorney Thompson has just told you a story about greed and betrayal. It's a good story, compelling, easy to understand, and emotionally satisfying. Unfortunately, it's not true." I found myself leaning forward, intrigued despite myself. Most pro se defendants were either mentally unstable or too poor to afford representation. Blackwood was neither. The truth is more complicated than Mr. Thompson would have you believe. Yes, I managed investments for several dozen clients over a 15-year period. Yes, some of those investments lost money. But the money didn't disappear into my pocket. It was stolen by someone else, someone who used my trust and reputation to gain access to client funds. Blackwood's opening was brief but effective. He didn't deny the basic facts. Money was missing, investors had lost their savings. But he positioned himself as another victim rather than the perpetrator. The first day of testimony unfolded predictably. Thompson called a parade of elderly victims who described how Blackwood had convinced them to invest their life savings. Each story was heartbreaking. Retired teachers who lost their pensions, widows who trusted Blackwood with their late husband's insurance money, elderly couples who now faced foreclosure because their investments had vanished. Mrs. Eleanor Hartley, 82 years old and confined to a wheelchair, testified that she had given Blackwood her entire retirement savings of $350,000. "He said it was a guaranteed return," she whispered into the microphone. "He promised my money would be safe." "And where is that money now, Mrs. Hartley?" Thompson asked gently. "Gone. All gone. I'm living on Social Security now, $800 a month. I had to sell my house." The jury was visibly affected. 2 women were crying, and several men looked like they wanted to physically assault Blackwood. This was exactly what Thompson excelled at, turning financial fraud into emotional drama. When it came time for cross-examination, I expected Blackwood to stumble. Most pro se defendants either asked irrelevant questions or made speeches instead of examining witnesses. But Blackwood surprised me. "Mrs. Hartley, I want you to know how sorry I am for your losses," he began. "You trusted me, and I failed to protect your investment. That's something I'll regret for the rest of my life." It wasn't a question, but Judge Wells allowed it. Blackwood was acknowledging responsibility while stopping short of admitting guilt, a delicate balance that required legal sophistication. "Mrs. Hartley, you mentioned that you invested your money in something called the Meridian Growth Fund. Do you remember signing the investment documents?" "Yes, you had them right there in your office." "And do you remember who managed the day-to-day operations of that fund?" Mrs. Hartley hesitated. "Well, you did, didn't you?" "Actually, no. The fund was managed by Meridian Investment Services, a separate company. I was simply the broker who connected investors with the fund managers. Do you remember meeting Mr. David Meridian?" I think so. There was another man there sometimes." "Mrs. Hartley, I know this is difficult, but it's important for the jury to understand what actually happened to your money. When you decided to invest, did I guarantee you wouldn't lose money? You said it was very safe. But did I specifically guarantee that you couldn't lose money?" Mrs. Hartley looked confused. "I don't remember exactly what you said. Blackwood was good, better than many licensed attorneys I had observed. He was systematically dismantling Thompson's narrative without attacking the victims or appearing heartless. Instead of denying that the victims had lost money, he was questioning whether he was actually responsible for those losses." Over the next 2 days, the pattern continued. Thompson presented his case methodically, building a wall of evidence that seemed insurmountable. Financial records showing missing funds, investment documents bearing Blackwood's signature, bank records tracing money from victim accounts to companies Blackwood controlled. But during cross-examination, Blackwood chipped away at the foundation of the prosecution's case. He didn't deny the documents or dispute the financial records. Instead, he focused on a single question: who had actual control over the missing money? By Thursday afternoon, I realized what Blackwood was doing. He was preparing to argue that someone else, this mysterious David Meridian, had been the real architect of the fraud. Blackwood was positioning himself as another victim, someone whose reputation and client relationships had been exploited by a more sophisticated criminal. It was a risky strategy that required precise execution. If Blackwood couldn't prove Meridian's existence and involvement, the jury would see his defense as a desperate attempt to shift blame. But if he could demonstrate that Meridian had real control over the stolen funds, reasonable doubt would creep into the prosecution's seemingly airtight case. Thompson, however, wasn't worried. During a recess, I overheard him talking to his assistant outside the courtroom. "Let the old man spin his fantasy about this Meridian character," Thompson said confidently. "We've checked. There's no record of any David Meridian connected to these investment companies. Blackwood is creating a fictional scapegoat, and the jury will see right through it." I continued mopping while processing this information. If Thompson was right, then Blackwood was either delusional or lying. But something about the old man's demeanor suggested otherwise. He didn't act like someone constructing a desperate fiction. He seemed genuinely convinced of his innocence. Friday morning brought the prosecution's final witnesses, FBI agents who had investigated the missing money and forensic accountants who had traced the funds through various shell companies. Their testimony was devastating. Every dollar of the missing $2.7 million had ultimately ended up in accounts controlled by companies that Blackwood owned. "The money trail is clear," testified Special Agent Rebecca Morrison. "Funds from victim accounts were transferred to the Meridian Growth Fund, then moved through a series of shell companies before ending up in accounts belonging to Blackwood Enterprises." During cross-examination, Blackwood focused on a single detail that seemed insignificant to everyone else. "Agent Morrison, you mentioned that the final transfers were made electronically. Do you have records showing who initiated those transfers?" "The transfers were authorized using Mr. Blackwood's digital signature and access codes. But do you have any evidence showing that I personally initiated those transfers? Security camera footage, keystroke logs, anything that proves I was physically present when the transfers occurred?" Morrison hesitated. "The transfers were made using your credentials, sir. That's how digital authentication works." "But anyone with access to my credentials could have made those transfers, correct?" "I suppose that's theoretically possible, but—" "Thank you, Agent Morrison." It was a small victory, but I could see it registered with at least some jurors. Blackwood was raising the possibility that someone else had used his access codes to steal the money. The prosecution rested Friday afternoon, and Judge Wells scheduled closing arguments for Monday morning. Over the weekend, I found myself thinking about the case constantly. Something about Blackwood's situation reminded me of my own, an older person being systematically destroyed by someone they had trusted. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I wheeled my cleaning cart into courtroom 3. Thompson's closing argument was a masterpiece of legal theater, combining emotional appeals with methodical presentation of evidence. "Henry Blackwood wants you to believe he's the victim here," Thompson concluded. "He wants you to believe that some mysterious David Meridian, a man no one can find, no one can identify, no one can verify ever existed, somehow stole $2.7 million while leaving Blackwood completely innocent. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not reasonable doubt. That's fantasy." When Thompson sat down, the courtroom was silent, except for the soft sound of Mrs. Hartley crying in the gallery. The jury looked convinced, and I didn't blame them. Thompson's case was comprehensive and compelling. Then Henry Blackwood stood to deliver his closing argument, and something in his posture told me he wasn't finished fighting. Ladies and gentlemen, District Attorney Thompson is right about one thing. My defense does depend on the existence of David Meridian. If I can't prove he existed, then I'm guilty of stealing money from people who trusted me. Blackwood walked to the evidence table and picked up a manila folder I hadn't noticed before. But what if I can prove it? He opened the folder and pulled out a stack of photographs. These are surveillance photos from my office building, taken by the security company over a 15-month period. They show a man meeting regularly with my clients, a man who had access to my office and my computer systems. I stopped pretending to clean and focused entirely on the proceedings. The photographs were clear enough to see faces, and they showed Blackwood with various elderly clients, but also showed a younger man, probably in his 40s, participating in several meetings. This is David Meridian, Blackwood continued. And these photographs prove he existed, that he had access to client information, and that he was present when several investment decisions were made. Thompson was on his feet immediately. Objection, Your Honor. This evidence wasn't disclosed during discovery. The defense can't introduce new evidence during closing arguments. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Wells said sternly, you should have presented this evidence during your case. Your Honor, I only received these photographs Friday afternoon. My former security company had stored them in archived files that weren't easily accessible. I had to hire a computer specialist to recover them. It was a plausible explanation, but Judge Wells looked skeptical. Even so, the prosecution has a right to examine this evidence and respond to it. I'm going to declare a recess while we sort this out. As the judge retreated to her chambers with both attorneys, I found myself staring at Henry Blackwood. Either he was a remarkable actor, or he had just produced evidence that could completely change the outcome of his trial. But something about the whole situation felt wrong. Blackwood was too calm, too prepared. Professional criminals didn't usually have backup evidence waiting in the wings. And if David Meridian was real, why hadn't Blackwood's former attorney used this evidence? During the hour-long recess, I watched Blackwood sitting alone at the defense table, studying his notes with the concentration of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. When Judge Wells returned, her expression was unreadable. Mr. Blackwood, I'm going to allow you to present this evidence, but the prosecution will have the opportunity to respond. We'll resume tomorrow morning. As the courtroom emptied, I lingered near my cleaning cart, watching Blackwood pack his briefcase. He moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to high-pressure situations, and I noticed his hands were steady despite the stress of representing himself in a felony trial. That's when our eyes met across the empty courtroom, and I realized he had been watching me too. "You're not really a janitor, are you?" he asked quietly. My heart stopped. In 6 months of hiding in plain sight, no one had looked past my uniform and cleaning cart. "I don't know what you mean." "You've been following this case more closely than most attorneys would. You understand the legal issues involved, and unless I'm mistaken, you've been taking notes." I glanced down and realized I had indeed been scribbling observations on the back of cleaning supply receipts. "I find legal cases interesting." "So do I," Blackwood said, standing and walking toward me. "I also find it interesting when someone with obvious legal training chooses to mop floors instead of practicing law." The conversation felt dangerous, but I couldn't walk away. "What makes you think I have legal training?" "Because you're the only person in this courtroom who seems to understand what I'm actually doing." Something about the way he said it made me believe that Henry Blackwood knew exactly who David Meridian was, and that tomorrow's testimony was going to change everything. But as I watched him leave the courtroom, briefcase in hand and shoulders straight despite facing 20 years in prison, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to become part of something much larger than a simple fraud trial. Something about this old man wasn't what it seemed. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of tension that makes experienced court reporters check their equipment twice, and bailiffs position themselves strategically around the room. I had arrived an hour early, ostensibly to clean the courtroom, but really to process what Henry Blackwood had said to me the previous afternoon. "You're not really a janitor, are you?" The question had haunted me all night. In 6 months of careful anonymity, I had convinced myself that my disguise was perfect. But Blackwood had seen through it in less than a week of casual observation. If he could pierce my cover so easily, how long before someone else did the same? How long before Jasper's private investigator traced me to Millbrook? I was arranging cleaning supplies for the 3rd time when Blackwood entered the courtroom at 7:45, 90 minutes before proceedings were scheduled to begin. He looked impeccable despite the circumstances. His charcoal suit pressed to perfection, his silver hair precisely styled, his expensive briefcase carried with the confidence of someone who owned the building, rather than someone facing potential decades in prison. "Good morning," he said, as he passed my position near the gallery railing. "I was hoping to find you here." I glanced around the empty courtroom, confirming we were alone. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't think we should be talking." "Why not? Because you're staff and I'm a defendant? Or because you're hiding from someone and don't want to draw attention to yourself?" The directness of his question stole my breath. "I'm not hiding from anyone." "Of course you're not. That's why a woman with your obvious legal background is working for $11 an hour mopping courthouse floors. That's why you've been taking detailed notes on trial proceedings. That's why you flinch every time someone mentions private investigators or family betrayal." He had been watching me far more carefully than I realized. "What do you want?" "I want to offer you a job, and I want to tell you who I really am." Before I could respond, he opened his briefcase and withdrew a business card holder made of what looked like sterling silver. The card he handed me was cream-colored, with raised lettering that spoke of serious money. "Henry Blackwood, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, Blackwood Media Group." I stared at the card, my mind racing. Blackwood Media Group was one of the largest communications companies in the country, owning newspapers, television stations, and digital platforms across 12 states. If Henry Blackwood was who this card claimed he was, then he was worth somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion. "You're him," I whispered. "You're actually Henry Blackwood." "I am. Which makes this fraud prosecution rather interesting, don't you think? Why would someone worth $800 million need to steal $2.7 million from elderly investors?" The question was rhetorical, but it crystallized everything that had felt wrong about this case. Blackwood's calm demeanor, his sophisticated legal strategy, his willingness to represent himself. None of it made sense if he was actually guilty of the charges. "Someone set you up," I said. "Someone who knew I had been managing small-scale investments as a personal favor to longtime friends. Someone who gained access to my office systems and client information. Someone who understood that my reputation and wealth would make me the perfect target for financial fraud charges. David Meridian. David Meridian is real, but that's not his actual name. His real name is David Martinez, and until 8 months ago, he was my director of financial operations. He had access to all my business systems, including the computers I used for personal investment management." The pieces clicked together in my mind. Martinez had used his access to Blackwood's systems to steal client funds while leaving behind a trail that pointed directly to his boss. When the fraud was discovered, Blackwood looked guilty while Martinez had disappeared. "Why didn't your attorney present this information?" "Because my attorney was David Martinez's brother-in-law, Carlos Mendoza, one of the finest criminal defense lawyers in the state, and someone I trusted completely. He assured me that the evidence against Martinez was insufficient and that our best strategy was to argue reasonable doubt about the missing money." The betrayal was breathtaking in its scope. Martinez had not only stolen the money and framed Blackwood, he had ensured that Blackwood would be represented by an attorney committed to his conviction. That's why you fired him and decided to represent yourself. "I discovered the family connection 3 days ago. My private investigators found marriage records showing that Martinez's sister had married Carlos Mendoza 6 years ago. Suddenly, Mendoza's reluctance to aggressively pursue the Martinez angle made perfect sense. But you still don't have proof that Martinez actually stole the money. Not yet, but I have something better than proof. I have David Martinez himself. I stared at him, certain I had misunderstood. You have him? Where? He's currently in a federal holding facility in Los Angeles, arrested 2 weeks ago for running a similar investment fraud scheme using a different identity. The FBI doesn't know yet that he's the same person who stole money from my clients. The implications were staggering. If Blackwood could prove that Martinez was David Meridian, and that Martinez had been running identical investment scams under multiple identities, it would completely exonerate him while exposing a far larger criminal enterprise. Why are you telling me this? Because I need an attorney I can trust, and you're the only person in this courthouse who isn't connected to the local legal establishment. Everyone else, prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges, they're all part of a system that David Martinez has been manipulating for months. I'm not an attorney. I'm a janitor. You were an attorney. A successful one, based on your knowledge and instincts. Something happened to you. Something involving family betrayal and financial manipulation, if I'm reading the signs correctly. You've been hiding here, but you're still a lawyer at heart. The conversation felt surreal. Here was one of the most powerful media executives in America, facing financial fraud charges, offering me a job based on watching me mop floors for a week. Even if I were an attorney, I haven't practiced in months. My license isn't active in this state. I couldn't represent you even if I wanted to. Actually, you could. Emergency admission to practice in specific cases is possible with the right sponsorship. And I know judges who would approve your temporary admission if I requested it. The temptation was overwhelming. For 6 months, I had been invisible, powerless, forgotten. The chance to practice law again, to engage my mind in complex legal strategy, to matter in a way that went beyond cleaning up other people's messes. It was everything I had lost when Jasper destroyed my life. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that you help me expose the truth about David Martinez. In return, I'll help you reclaim whatever was stolen from you. My company has investigative resources that law enforcement agencies would envy. We can find evidence, trace financial transactions, uncover conspiracies. Whatever was done to you, we can prove it. The offer was seductive and terrifying in equal measure. After months of hiding, Blackwood was offering me the chance to fight back against the people who had destroyed my life. You don't even know what happened to me. I know enough. I know you were financially successful before you ended up here. I know your downfall involved family members who betrayed your trust. I know you're intelligent, principled, and angry enough to risk everything for justice. That's all I need to know. He reached into his briefcase again and withdrew a thick folder. These are the FBI reports on David Martinez's arrest in Los Angeles. The fingerprints, photographs, and criminal history of the man who stole money from my clients and framed me for his crimes. I opened the folder and found myself staring at booking photos of a man in his early 40s with dark hair and calculating eyes. According to the arrest report, he had been running investment scams across multiple states under at least 4 different identities. This proves Martinez exists and that he's a career criminal. But how does it prove he's the one who stole money from your clients? Look at page 7. I flipped through the documents and found a financial forensics report. According to FBI analysis, Martinez had been using a sophisticated computer program to hack into investment management systems and redirect client funds. The technical details were complex, but the basic pattern was clear. Martinez would gain legitimate access to financial systems, then use specialized software to steal money, while leaving behind evidence that pointed to his supervisors. He's done this before, at least 6 times in the past 4 years. Always targeting older executives who managed small-scale investment accounts as personal favors. Always using his position as a trusted employee to gain system access. Always disappearing when the fraud was discovered while leaving his bosses to face criminal charges. How many people has he destroyed? The 4 previous victims are currently serving prison sentences for crimes Martinez committed. 2 others died while awaiting trial. I'm the first person who figured out what he was actually doing. The scope of Martinez's operation was breathtaking. He wasn't just a thief. He was a serial destroyer of lives, targeting successful people and turning their accomplishments against them. Why hasn't the FBI connected these cases? Because Martinez uses different identities and targets victims in different jurisdictions. Local prosecutors see individual fraud cases, not a national pattern. The FBI is focused on his most recent crimes, not the trail of destruction he's left behind. But you've figured it out. I have resources that most defendants don't have: private investigators, computer forensic specialists, financial analysts. When I realized my own attorney was compromised, I started conducting my own investigation. The morning session was scheduled to begin in 15 minutes, but I found myself transfixed by the evidence in front of me. David Martinez wasn't just a sophisticated criminal. He was a predator who specifically targeted successful older professionals, using their trust and reputation against them. Mr. Blackwood, even if everything you're saying is true, presenting this evidence today won't be enough. The prosecution will argue that it's irrelevant to your specific charges. You need time to properly investigate the connections and prepare legal arguments. Which is why I need an attorney who understands complex financial fraud and isn't part of the local legal establishment. Someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain from exposing the truth. People were starting to enter the courtroom: court reporters, bailiffs, early arriving spectators. Our window for private conversation was closing rapidly. I need time to think about this. Of course. But while you're thinking, consider this. David Martinez destroyed your life too, didn't he? Maybe not directly, but someone used his playbook, gained your trust, accessed your financial systems, stole your money while making you look guilty of poor judgment, or worse. The accuracy of his assessment was chilling. Jasper had indeed used my trust against me, accessed my financial accounts through the power of attorney I had given him, and stolen my wealth while constructing a narrative that made me appear mentally incompetent. How did you know? Because it's the same pattern Martinez uses. Target successful people who trust family members or close associates, gain legitimate access to their financial systems, steal systematically while building evidence that the victim is responsible for their own losses. When the theft is discovered, the victim looks guilty while the real perpetrator disappears. You think there's a connection between Martinez and what happened to me? I think Martinez has been teaching his techniques to other people, training them to destroy families from within while building plausible cover stories for their theft. The possibility that Jasper had been trained by someone like Martinez, that my son's betrayal was part of a larger criminal enterprise, filled me with a rage that surprised me with its intensity. Even if that's true, I can't prove it. I left everything behind when I fled. I have no evidence, no resources, no credibility. But I do. Help me expose Martinez, and we'll use the same investigative techniques to uncover what really happened to you. Justice isn't just about my case. It's about stopping a criminal enterprise that destroys families for profit. District Attorney Thompson entered the courtroom, followed by his assistant and a parade of FBI agents. The morning session was about to begin, and I needed to return to my position with the cleaning cart. What do you need from me right now? I need you to watch this morning's proceedings very carefully. I'm going to present the Martinez evidence, and Thompson is going to object strenuously. But watch the FBI agents' faces when they see the fingerprint matches and criminal history reports. They'll recognize the pattern even if Thompson doesn't. And then? Then we'll see if the criminal justice system can handle the truth, or if it's too invested in the narrative they've already constructed. As I wheeled my cleaning cart to the back of the courtroom, my mind raced with possibilities. For 6 months, I had accepted my fate as a victim of family betrayal. But if Blackwood was right about Martinez training others, then Jasper's destruction of my life might be part of a larger criminal conspiracy. The thought of finally fighting back, of using my legal skills to expose the truth and reclaim my dignity, was intoxicating. But it was also terrifying. Stepping out of the shadows meant risking exposure, confronting Jasper's lies, and accepting that my son might be more than just a greedy betrayer. He might be a trained criminal. As Judge Wells called the court to order, I realized that everything was about to change. In the next few hours, Henry Blackwood would either prove his innocence or confirm his guilt. And depending on the outcome, I would either remain a janitor hiding from her past or become an attorney again, fighting for justice against the people who had destroyed everything I'd built. The choice was mine, but watching Blackwood stand confidently at the defense table, I knew I had already made my decision. The most powerful media owner in the state was about to discover that he wasn't the only one who had been systematically destroyed by someone they trusted. And David Martinez was about to learn that his victims were starting to fight back. 3 weeks after Henry Blackwood's acquittal, I stood in the law library of Blackwood Media Group's headquarters, surrounded by more legal resources than I had ever dreamed of accessing. The 42nd floor of the downtown tower offered a panoramic view of the city, but I was focused on the documents spread across the mahogany conference table, evidence that would finally expose the truth about my son's betrayal. The morning Henry presented the Martinez evidence had been a turning point for both of us. When FBI agent Rebecca Morrison compared the fingerprints from the Los Angeles arrest to the security footage from Henry's office, her face had gone pale. David Martinez and David Meridian were unquestionably the same person, and the Bureau's own records proved he had been running identical scams across multiple states. District Attorney Thompson had fought hard to maintain his prosecution, arguing that Martinez's other crimes didn't prove Henry's innocence in this specific case. But when Henry's private investigators produced bank records showing Martinez had used the stolen funds to purchase property under yet another false identity, reasonable doubt became reasonable certainty. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a not guilty verdict on all charges. But Henry's vindication was only the beginning. True to his word, he had immediately turned his investigative resources toward uncovering what had happened to me. What we discovered was both worse and better than I had imagined. "Alma, you need to see this," called Janet Morrison, one of Henry's senior investigators from across the library. She was a former FBI agent who had left the Bureau to work exclusively on complex financial crimes, and her expertise had proved invaluable in tracing the connections between Martinez and my son. I walked over to her workstation, where 3 computer monitors displayed financial records, communication logs, and surveillance footage. "What did you find?" "Your son Jasper attended a seminar 18 months ago called Family Wealth Management and Elder Care Planning. It was advertised as a legitimate financial planning workshop, but look at who was running it." On the center monitor was a photograph of the seminar's presenter, David Martinez, though he was using the identity David Morgan at the time. The seminar materials promised to teach attendees how to protect family assets from poor decision-making by aging relatives. My stomach clenched as the pieces fell into place. Martinez was teaching people how to steal from their own families. It gets worse. We found records of 23 people who attended this seminar. 11 of them subsequently gained power of attorney over elderly relatives' finances. 9 of those relatives were later declared incompetent or committed to care facilities under suspicious circumstances. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. Martinez hadn't just been stealing money directly. He had been training others to destroy their own families while providing legal cover for the thefts. Does this mean Jasper was working directly with Martinez? Janet pulled up another screen showing financial transactions. Not exactly. Martinez was clever about maintaining plausible deniability. He taught general techniques, but left his students to implement them independently. That way, when law enforcement investigated individual cases, they saw isolated family disputes rather than a coordinated criminal enterprise. But Jasper used Martinez's methods. Almost exactly. The fake medical records suggesting cognitive decline, the gradual isolation from professional contacts, The systematic liquidation of assets followed by placement in a care facility. It's identical to the pattern Martinez taught in his seminars. I stared at the evidence, feeling a mixture of vindication and disgust. For months, I had wondered if I was truly losing my memory, if Jasper's accusations of financial irresponsibility might have some basis in reality. Now I knew that every doubt, every moment of self-questioning, had been deliberately orchestrated. What about the money? Can we trace where it went? That's the good news, Henry said, entering the library with his own stack of documents. Jasper may have learned Martinez's psychological manipulation techniques, but he didn't inherit his financial sophistication. The money trail is much easier to follow. Henry spread out bank statements and investment records across the table. Your original estate was worth approximately $8.2 million. Jasper liquidated $6.8 million through a series of authorized transactions over 18 months. But instead of hiding the money in offshore accounts or complex shell companies, he simply moved it into accounts bearing his and Lenny's names. He kept it in regular bank accounts? Worse, he used a significant portion to purchase real estate, luxury cars, and other assets that are easily traceable and recoverable. Jasper thought that having your power of attorney made him legally untouchable, but he didn't understand the difference between legal authority and criminal fraud. Janet pulled up photographs of Jasper's new lifestyle: a penthouse apartment worth $1.2 million, a BMW and Mercedes totaling $150,000, designer furniture and artwork valued at over $300,000. The beautiful thing about Jasper's arrogance, Henry continued, is that he documented everything meticulously. He kept receipts, filed insurance claims, even paid taxes on some of the stolen money. He was so confident in his legal position that he didn't bother hiding his crimes. Can we get the money back? We can get most of it back. I've already filed preliminary motions to freeze Jasper's assets pending a full investigation. By the end of the week, he won't be able to access any accounts or sell any property without court approval. The thought of Jasper suddenly finding himself financially paralyzed, unable to maintain the lifestyle he had stolen from me, provided a satisfaction I hadn't expected. For months, he had been living off my life's work while believing I was safely hidden away or locked in some care facility. What about criminal charges? That's where things get interesting, Henry said with a smile that reminded me why he was successful in the media business. Jasper committed his crimes using techniques taught by a known criminal enterprise. That makes his case part of a larger federal investigation into Martinez's network. The FBI is very interested in prosecuting everyone who attended those seminars and subsequently defrauded family members. You mean this won't just be handled at the state level? Federal charges for conspiracy, wire fraud, and elder abuse. Jasper is looking at potential sentences of 15 to 20 years in federal prison, plus full restitution of stolen funds. The magnitude of what Henry had accomplished in 3 weeks was staggering. Not only had he cleared his own name and exposed Martinez's criminal network, but he had built an airtight case against Jasper that would result in both financial recovery and criminal justice. There's something else, Janet added, pulling up a new set of documents. While we were investigating your son's finances, we discovered that his wife, Lenny, has been having an affair with Martinez's former business partner. They've been planning to disappear with whatever money they could steal once the heat died down. The revelation that Lenny was not only complicit in the theft, but actively planning to abandon Jasper, added another layer of poetic justice to the situation. My son had betrayed me for money, and now his wife was preparing to betray him for the same reason. Do they know we're investigating them? Not yet. We've been very careful to conduct our investigation without alerting local law enforcement or courts where Jasper might have contacts. As far as he knows, you're still missing, and his theft remains undiscovered. Henry walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city where somewhere below, Jasper was living in a penthouse purchased with stolen money while believing himself untouchable. Alma, I want you to understand something important, he said without turning around. What we've uncovered isn't just about recovering your money or punishing your son. Martinez's network has destroyed hundreds of families across the country. Elderly parents who trusted their children have been systematically robbed and discarded. If we can expose this conspiracy, we can prevent it from happening to others. What do you need from me? I need you to be willing to step out of the shadows and fight this publicly. The evidence we've gathered is strong, but prosecutors will want victim testimony to ensure convictions. That means revealing where you've been, explaining why you fled, and confronting the people who destroyed your life. The prospect of facing Jasper again, of sitting in a courtroom while he tried to maintain his lies about my mental incompetence, was both terrifying and exhilarating. For 6 months, I had hidden from confrontation. Now I was being offered the chance to destroy him with the truth. When do we start? Tomorrow morning. I've arranged a meeting with the federal prosecutor handling the Martinez case. She's prepared to offer Jasper a plea bargain if he cooperates in exposing others who attended the seminars. But if he refuses, full prosecution. Full prosecution. And Alma, there's one more thing you should know. The federal prosecutor is someone you might remember from your own legal career. Assistant U.S. Attorney Maria Santos. I recognized the name immediately. Maria had been a brilliant young prosecutor when I was practicing law, known for her meticulous case preparation and her passion for white-collar crime. If she was handling this case, Jasper was in serious trouble. Maria always believed that financial crimes against family members were particularly heinous, Henry continued. She's going to pursue this case aggressively, especially once she understands the scope of Martinez's network. That evening, I returned to my studio apartment for what I hoped would be the last time. Tomorrow, I would reclaim my real identity and begin the process of rebuilding my life. The apartment that had been my refuge for 6 months now felt claustrophobic and temporary, a reminder of how far I had fallen and how much I had lost. But as I sat at the small kitchen table, reviewing the evidence that would destroy my son's life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: control. For the first time since discovering Jasper's betrayal, I wasn't reacting to his actions. I was dictating the terms of our final confrontation. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed Jasper's number, the first time he had tried to contact me in weeks. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Hello, Jasper." Mom, where are you? I've been so worried." The fake concern in his voice no longer affected me. I knew exactly what he was doing, maintaining his narrative of the devoted son searching for his sick mother. "I'm safe, Jasper." "Thank God." "Mom, you need to come home. I've been looking everywhere for you. The doctors said you might become confused, might not remember how to take care of yourself." "I remember everything, Jasper, including what you did to me." A long silence. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its pretense of warmth. "Mom, you're not well. You're creating conspiracies, imagining things that didn't happen. That's part of your condition." "My condition?" "The dementia, Mom. We've talked about this. You signed the power of attorney because you were starting to forget things, make poor financial decisions. I've been protecting you." Even now, caught in his web of lies, Jasper was committed to his story. He genuinely believed that his manufactured medical records and forged documents would protect him from consequences. "Jasper, I want you to know something. Tomorrow morning, federal agents are going to arrest you for conspiracy, wire fraud, and elder abuse. They're also going to freeze all your assets and begin the process of recovering every dollar you stole from me." Another silence, longer this time. "That's impossible. You don't have any evidence. You ran away because you were confused and scared. No one will believe your word against documented medical records." "I don't need anyone to believe my word. I have bank records, surveillance footage, and testimony from the man who taught you how to destroy your own mother. David Martinez is cooperating with federal investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence." I heard Jasper's sharp intake of breath. The name Martinez clearly meant something to him. I don't know any David Martinez. The seminar you attended 18 months ago, Family Wealth Management and Elder Care Planning. But you learned every technique you used against me from a career criminal who has been teaching people how to rob their own families. You're insane. You're making this up. By noon tomorrow, you'll be in federal custody. Your penthouse will be seized, your cars will be impounded, and every asset you purchased with my money will be frozen pending restitution proceedings. Lenny might want to reconsider her travel plans. The mention of Lenny seemed to break something in Jasper. What? Travel plans? What are you talking about? Ask her about her relationship with Martinez's business partner. Ask her about the bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. Ask her why she's been researching countries with non-extradition treaties. You're lying. Maybe. Or maybe you're about to learn that you weren't the only one planning to disappear with stolen money. I hung up before he could respond, then immediately turned off my phone. By now, Jasper was probably calling Lenny, demanding explanations about my accusations. With any luck, their panicked conversation would provide additional evidence for the federal prosecutors. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Tomorrow, justice would finally begin. Not the dramatic revenge I had once fantasized about, but something better. The systematic exposure of truth and the restoration of what had been stolen. Jasper had taught me that family could be a source of ultimate betrayal. But Henry Blackwood had taught me something equally important. Family could also be chosen. And sometimes the people who stand by you when everything falls apart are worth more than the ones who destroyed you for money. Everything you stole will be returned, I thought as I drifted off to sleep. And this time, you'll face the consequences of your choices. 8 months after my son's arrest, I stood in the doorway of my new law office, watching the morning sun stream through windows that faced east toward possibilities I had thought were lost forever. The brass nameplate beside the door read, Alma Rodriguez, Attorney at Law, Family Protection Services, and every time I saw it, I felt a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with purpose. The federal prosecution of Jasper and 17 other Martinez network participants had concluded 6 weeks ago. Jasper received 12 years in federal prison plus full restitution, a sentence that reflected both the severity of his crimes and his refusal to cooperate with investigators. Lenny had been arrested trying to board a flight to Costa Rica with $230,000 in cash and faced her own federal charges. I recovered $4.2 million of the original $8.2 million Jasper had stolen. The remainder had been spent on lifestyle expenses that couldn't be recovered. Vacations, restaurant bills, designer clothes that had already been worn and discarded. It was enough to rebuild my life, though not enough to erase the cost of his betrayal. But sitting across from my current client, Mrs. Dorothy Hayward, I realized that the money had never been the real issue. The real issue was trust, family, and the devastating consequences when people you love decide you're worth more to them dead or incapacitated than alive and independent. My grandson Tommy has been asking about my will again, Mrs. Hayward was saying, her 78-year-old hands trembling slightly as she reached for her teacup. He wants to help me organize my finances and says I should give him power of attorney so he can protect me from making mistakes. The words sent a chill down my spine. They were almost identical to the phrases Jasper had used when he began his systematic destruction of my life. Mrs. Hayward, how old is Tommy? 34. He's been out of work for 6 months. Says the economy is too hard for young people. He's been staying with me to help around the house, but mostly he just brings women over and makes a mess. And when did these conversations about your finances begin? Right after his girlfriend moved in with him. She keeps talking about how expensive everything is, how unfair it is that older people have all the money while young people struggle. Tommy's girlfriend was clearly the driving force behind this particular scheme, though Mrs. Hayward didn't realize it yet. The pattern was becoming familiar. I had handled 12 similar cases since opening my practice, all involving young relatives who had suddenly developed an interest in their elderly family members' financial well-being. Mrs. Hayward, I want you to understand something important. People who truly care about your welfare don't need power of attorney to help you manage your finances. They help because they love you, not because they want to control you. But Tommy says I'm getting forgetful, that I might make poor decisions with my money. Have you been making poor decisions? She considered the question carefully. Well, no. I balance my checkbook every month, pay all my bills on time, and I have enough savings to live comfortably for the rest of my life. But Tommy says that could change if I become sick or confused. And Tommy has suggested solutions to prevent that? He thinks I should transfer my accounts to his name, just to be safe. He says if something happens to me, at least the money will be protected. Protected for whom, I thought, but didn't say. Instead, I opened Mrs. Hayward's file and reviewed the financial assessment my investigators had compiled. Her savings totaled $670,000, enough to attract a predator like Tommy, but not enough to justify the legal fees of a protracted battle if she could be convinced to act preemptively. Mrs. Hayward, would you be interested in learning about some alternatives to giving Tommy power of attorney? Ways to protect your money that don't require you to give up control? Her relief was immediate and obvious. Yes, please. I love Tommy, but something about this whole situation feels wrong. Over the next hour, I explained the various legal instruments available to protect elderly people from financial predators. Irrevocable trusts, financial monitoring services, court-supervised guardianships that required judicial oversight for major financial decisions. All of them provided protection while preserving Mrs. Hayward's independence and dignity. The most important thing, I concluded, is that you don't have to make any immediate decisions. Despite what Tommy might be telling you, there's no emergency that requires you to sign over control of your life savings. What if he gets angry when I tell him I'm not ready to sign anything? Then you'll know his real motivation. People who genuinely care about your welfare will respect your decision to proceed carefully. After Mrs. Hayward left, I spent the rest of the morning reviewing case files for the family protection practice I had built. 13 active cases involving financial elder abuse, 7 successful interventions where we had prevented theft before it occurred, and 4 criminal referrals where family members had already begun stealing money. The work was emotionally draining, but deeply satisfying. Every elderly person I helped maintain their independence was a victory against the predatory system that had destroyed my own family. Every criminal referral was another crack in the network of people who saw their aging relatives as ATM machines rather than human beings deserving respect. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I recognized but hadn't expected to see. The federal prison where Jasper was serving his sentence. This is a collect call from federal inmate Jasper Hernandez. Will you accept the charges? I hesitated for a long moment, then accepted the call. Mom? Jasper's voice was smaller than I remembered, lacking the confident arrogance that had characterized our last conversation. Mom, thank you for taking my call. What do you want, Jasper? I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry, not because I got caught, not because I'm in prison, but because I hurt you. Because I betrayed someone who loved me unconditionally. The apology was something I had imagined hearing for months, but actually hearing it felt strange and anticlimactic. Why now? Because I've been in therapy. The prison psychologist has been helping me understand what I did and why I did it. I know this doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to know that I finally understand how wrong I was. And what did you understand? That I convinced myself you owed me everything because I was your son. That I decided your success was something I deserved rather than something you had earned. I turned you into an obstacle to my happiness instead of recognizing you as the person who gave me every opportunity I ever had. The insights were accurate and probably genuine, but they came far too late to matter. Jasper, I'm glad you're getting help, but an apology doesn't undo what you did. I know. I destroyed your trust, stole your money, tried to have you committed to a mental facility. I ruined your life because I was too selfish and entitled to build my own. You didn't ruin my life, Jasper. You changed it in ways I never expected, but you didn't ruin it. What do you mean? I looked around my office, at the case files representing people I had helped, at the law degree I had reclaimed and was using to protect vulnerable families. I mean that losing everything forced me to discover who I really am. I spent 30 years building wealth and status, but I never understood my own purpose until I lost everything and had to start over. So you're okay? I'm better than okay. I'm doing work that matters to people who need help. I'm using my skills to protect families instead of just accumulating money. In a strange way, your betrayal led me to the most meaningful work of my career. There was a long silence on the line. Does that mean you forgive me? The question I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. I had spent months imagining this conversation, but now that it was happening, my answer surprised even me. I don't forgive you, Jasper. What you did was unforgivable. But I don't hate you anymore either. Hatred requires energy I'd rather use for other things. What happens now? Now you serve your sentence and figure out who you want to be when you get out. And I continue helping people avoid what you did to me. Will you ever want to see me again? I don't know. Maybe someday, when enough time has passed and you've proven that your apology was genuine rather than just convenient. But that's a conversation for the future, not today. I understand. Mom, I know this doesn't mean anything coming from me, but I'm proud of what you've built. The newspaper article about your new practice said you're helping people who don't have anywhere else to turn. The newspaper article. Henry Blackwood's papers have been covering your cases. They call you the guardian attorney because you protect elderly people from their own families. I hadn't realized my work was receiving media attention, but it made sense that Henry would use his platforms to highlight the ongoing problem of financial elder abuse. He had remained a close friend and occasional collaborator since my return to practice, and his investigative resources had proved invaluable in building cases against family predators. Jasper, I have to go. I have clients who need my help. Of course, Mom, thank you for taking my call. Goodbye, Jasper. I hung up feeling emotionally drained but oddly at peace. The conversation had provided closure I hadn't realized I needed. Confirmation that Jasper understood the magnitude of his crimes, but also recognition that forgiveness wasn't necessary for me to move forward. That evening, I met Henry for dinner at our usual restaurant, a quiet place downtown where we could discuss ongoing cases without being overheard. He had become something between a father figure and a business partner, someone who understood the unique challenges of rebuilding a life after complete betrayal. "How are you feeling after the call?" he asked, cutting into his salmon with the precise movements of someone accustomed to efficiency in all things. Relieved, mostly. I spent months wondering if he would ever acknowledge what he had done. Now I know he understands, and somehow that matters less than I expected. "Forgiveness is overrated," Henry said with characteristic bluntness. "Understanding is more important than forgiveness. Justice is more important than reconciliation." Is that what we've achieved? Justice? Look around you, Alma. You're practicing law again, helping people who desperately need protection. Jasper is in prison, paying for his crimes. The Martinez network has been exposed and dismantled. Dozens of elderly people are safer because of the work we've done together. If that's not justice, it's close enough. I thought about Mrs. Hayward, about the relief on her face when she realized she didn't have to choose between family loyalty and financial security. I thought about the other clients I had helped, the predators I had exposed, the families I had saved from destruction. "You know what the strangest part is?" I said. "I'm happier now than I was before. When I had millions of dollars and a successful practice, I was successful but not particularly fulfilled. Now I have less money, but more purpose. Money is a tool, not a goal. It took losing everything for you to understand the difference. What about you? Do you ever regret getting involved in my situation?" Henry smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Alma, you saved my life, too. If you hadn't stepped forward during my trial, I would have spent the rest of my life in federal prison for crimes I didn't commit. We saved each other." After dinner, I drove home to my modest but comfortable townhouse, a place I had chosen for its security rather than its status. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed the motion sensor lights illuminating my front garden where I had planted roses the previous spring. The roses were blooming now, their red petals bright even in the artificial light. They reminded me of the garden I had lost when Jasper destroyed my old life. But these roses were different. These I had planted with my own hands, in soil I had prepared myself, supported by a life I had built from nothing. Inside, I poured a glass of wine and settled into my reading chair with the case files I needed to review for tomorrow's appointments. Mrs. Hayward's grandson Tommy had called her 3 times since our meeting, each time becoming more insistent about the power of attorney documents. Tomorrow, I would help her understand that his urgency was itself evidence of his true intentions. As I worked, I realized something that would have surprised the woman who fled her mansion 8 months ago. I was content. Not happy in the carefree way of someone who had never been betrayed, but content in the deeper way of someone who had survived the worst and discovered they were stronger than they knew. My phone rang once more before bedtime. Henry, calling to share news about a case we were working on together. The FBI wants to expand the investigation into the Martinez network. They think there might be similar operations in other states, possibly coordinated by the same criminal organization. More families destroyed by people they trusted? More families we can help if we expose the pattern. Are you interested in consulting on a national level? I considered the offer, thinking about elderly people across the country who might be facing the same predatory schemes that had destroyed my relationship with Jasper. Yes, but I want to maintain my local practice too. The people here need protection just as much as anyone else. Of course, Alma. Thank you for everything you've done, not just for me, but for all the families you've helped. You've turned your worst experience into other people's salvation. After Henry hung up, I sat quietly in my reading chair, watching the roses sway in the evening breeze through my window. 8 months ago, I had been a victim hiding from her own son. Tonight, I was an attorney helping other people avoid the same fate. The transformation wasn't complete. I still missed the naive trust I had once placed in family, still felt the occasional pang of grief for the relationship with Jasper that could never be repaired. But I had learned something valuable from my destruction. Sometimes the best revenge isn't punishment, but proving that those who tried to break you actually made you stronger. Tomorrow, I would help Mrs. Hayward protect herself from her grandson's schemes. Next week, I would testify at a congressional hearing about financial elder abuse. Next month, I would collaborate with Henry on exposing another network of family predators. And in all of that work, I would honor the lesson my son had inadvertently taught me. True success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you protect. For the first time in months, I finally understood what true peace felt like. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of purpose that no one could steal or destroy. I was home. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.